All right, let's take a look at this first chapter, which is entitled Last Hominid Standing. If you have been to the Unit 1 guide and taken a look at our opening unit lecture, then you know that this is building a story here, that we are looking at the movement of humans from basically from hunting and gathering to eventually settled and civilized by the time we get to chapter 3, by the from being in Africa to populating the world. So this is a process, and as the author pointed out in his video, it's a very slow moving process. So chapter 1 basically takes us into the beginnings really of mankind. So if we take a look at our PowerPoint here, and let's go through a few things real quick that I want you to make sure that you get from the reading. First, if you go through the PowerPoint, you notice that these are our objectives. Okay, what events led to the emergence of human ancestors, or the major traits and skills of Homo sapiens? What were the major characteristics of hominins? What did the global migrations of Homo sapiens contribute to increasing cultural and genetic diversification? And what ways did human culture change dramatically in the late Paleolithic period? I'll give you a hint. We stopped hunting and gathering and started to settle, so that's a big deal for us. So throughout this first chapter, you're taking a look at the origins of humans. To be honest, this is not necessarily a section that historians can deal with very effectively. Most of our evidence is archaeological. It doesn't really fit the definition of what true history is, which is that history is a study of the recorded past. So a lot of this is simply a best guess about what has happened over time, supported by archaeological evidence that has been unearthed, studied, and we have a pretty good picture of us as we began to develop as a species and then began to move about. So let's take a look at that. Notice that, go back to that video that the author put up. All right, our evidence is not the best. We don't have a tremendous amount of evidence about early humans. That it's very slow. It's really tough to kind of deal with this early period. So two big terms that you will learn in this early part of human history. These are big time periods. We tend to try to deal with large sections of time by trying to name them. And in this case, you're going to learn about the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, all right, the Old Stone Age, the New Stone Age. For these time periods to change, obviously something important has to happen. If we move from Old Stone to New Stone, something has to happen. And that thing that happens really is agriculture and the first appearance of cities, which takes us towards civilization. So the chapter kind of takes you on a journey of basically what we know about us, about the universe that we live in. So as you read through that, you try to get a bigger picture of really who we are. We as a species do things that other species really don't. We stand up, we walk upright, which freed our hands to become tool making things, which don't necessarily, when you really think about it, increase our survival ability, except that one of the things that also continued to develop was our brains. And as we got smarter, as our brains got bigger, we began to make better tools, we began to make better decisions, and as a result, we were able to survive. All right, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because a lot of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory as you do your reading. So you really kind of start with Lucy. Lucy is one of the sort of first real, I guess, groundbreaking ideas about us as a human species and when we began to walk upright. And we date that back to somewhere between 3 and 4 million years ago. From that point forward, humans are going to embrace really things that make us different. Bipedalism, all right, being social groups, working together, making tools, right? And eventually, as our brains got bigger and bigger, able to control fire, to use language, and those things are going to be important in our survival. So remember, this is the old Stone Age, and so stone tools were really what we were using early on. Those are going to get better and better and better, especially as our brains got bigger and bigger. The other big thing about this, and he talked a little bit about this too, is migration. We are, as we get bigger and as we get sort of better hunters, we're also going to have to move because it becomes important that we follow our food supplies. Hunting and gathering, animals aren't just going to wander into your camp and allow you to use them for food. So you have to follow the animals. And if animals become scarce in one area, we've got to move to the other. And so that is one of the reasons why we began to migrate. And so you can talk about some of these migrations. In our discussion, you're going to read about, you're going to watch a video about the Neanderthals. So as you read, make sure that you pay close attention to the Neanderthals. Really one of our first true Homo sapiens species, developed maybe about 400, 500,000 years ago. And they were once considered very different from us. But as you sort of watch that video, I think, and as you comment on that video, I think you'll find that the Neanderthals were actually very human. So you're going to go through some of these as well, okay, and some of the new species that have been uncovered as a result of archaeological evidence. But eventually, as we said, you get to this idea that, hey, we had to move, we got to migrate, we've got to end up getting out of Africa, which is where we originated, and then into other parts of the world. And so you will read about, study about those migrations, the role that climate played in that, especially the Ice Age, because it lowered sea levels, made places accessible that today are not accessible because of really you have higher sea levels, okay? And so you'll read about some of those things. But eventually one of the things that also is we're going to kind of move is we're going to get out of us being Paleolithic, and we're going to start moving out of Paleolithic times into Neolithic times, okay? One of the big things that you also kind of need to understand, and if you were living at this time, you would be a hunter and gatherer. These things all are part of what hunting and gathering is, okay? And most of our human existence has been spent hunting and gathering. So it's important that you understand what hunting and gathering is, okay, because that's going to it's going to change later on, okay? So after kind of getting a good idea about what Paleolithic life was like, what hunting and gathering life was like, okay, and what we were doing during the Paleolithic period, okay, you're going to eventually start to make this shift, okay? As you get to the end of the chapter, you're going to start seeing that we're going to start making this shift from hunting and gathering to settling down, okay? So in summary, take a look at the what the chapter's trying to get you to understand, okay? That during this period of time, all right, we became Homo sapiens. We were successful because of some of the things that we were doing, especially tool making, big brains, okay, and our culture, which allowed us to survive, okay, and flourish, really, and flourish to the point to where hunting and gathering is going to be discarded in favor of settling down and staying in one place. All right, so hopefully that'll give you a pretty good idea about what you need to be piecing out as you read the chapter. I would suggest a couple of things to prepare you for your exams as you do this, okay? There's an outline available that you can pull off and use that to sort of help guide your reading. You can use this PowerPoint and take notes on it as well. But at the end of the chapter, there's a list of important terms. I would make sure that in my reading that I could identify those terms. Those terms are important. They're singled out for a reason. That I would make sure that as I read that important things that come up in the chapter, I would jot down in my outline or on my PowerPoint slides, because when it comes time to study for that first exam, you need a way to kind of go back and remember what you have read and remember some of the important things that you've uncovered in your reading and during your exploration of the chapter. So be active in your learning. Okay, don't just sit there and try to do your homework and not engage and try to study the material as you go, because then when you get to the end of the unit, you have a lot of information to deal with, and it can be overwhelming if you're not doing it piece by piece by piece. So that's my one big advice as you get into piece of advice as you get into chapter 1. All right, next time, chapter 2.